Hello again, everyone. So now here we are in step 6 of our journey to locate intrapersonal communication. So far what we've done is this. We've started out just kind of saying, you know what, we've walked away from the temptation to just say intrapersonal communication is communicating within yourself. And we've used this metaphor of locating it to go much deeper into really what intrapersonal communication is and what it involves. So we've gone through and we've seen it and how it relates to the transactional model of communication. We've seen it viewed as a level. We've seen it viewed as a phenomenon. We've taken a look at it through sort of a more philosophical yet biological, neurological lens when we talk about sensation and perception. We're talking about knowledge of, knowledge about. Remember all of this so far? I don't know how far apart you're watching these screencasts. So we're talking about intrapersonal communication as occurring on the level of perception, as being constructive of our reality, not receptive. Receptive is the sensation part. And so we then, in our last screencast, we asked and answered some important questions. And so I'll bring those. Actually, I'll go back and just bring those back up. Remember, we said that we said that talking to ourselves and thinking about something are both intrapersonal communication because they require making meaning. We said that all behavior is communication on some level because it requires conceptual thought. The reason why we made that choice is because it gives us more ground to explore in our study of intrapersonal communication. And then on our last question, we said, when are we engaged in it? Well, we're engaged in it when we are making meaning within or with ourselves. So this now makes us ready to move forward and actually look at some definitions. So now we can get to ways of looking at intrapersonal communication that will help us really understand where it's at. Now what we're doing is we're visiting Rhode Island. We didn't just pull up the map and see it's on the eastern seaboard. We didn't just sort of zoom in and take a look at it from a bird's eye view of the state. We got off a plane now in Providence, and we are exploring Rhode Island now. Okay? So here we are. One of the first ways we can look at intrapersonal communication is as an act. And I'll bring myself back, and then I'll have to disappear here in a minute so you can see everything. So intrapersonal communication as an act. So these definitions are going to have some sort of an act involved. So communication with or within oneself involving introspection about one's thoughts, perceptions, and beliefs. See, one of the amazing things about you as a human being is you can not only have the thought, but you can then reflect on your thought. You can think about your thinking. You can have a perception, and then you can ask yourself questions about those perceptions. So you could say, you can actually go, oh my gosh, today is just a horrible morning. And then inside yourself you can go, why am I thinking that today's a horrible morning? Why am I so grumpy today? Why? You can ask yourself these questions. And so that's introspection. And actually we're gonna define the difference later in our semester about the difference between introspection, rumination, stuff like that. Mulling, those are different things. So communication with or within oneself involving introspection about one's thoughts, perceptions, and beliefs. The process interior to the individual by which reality evolves and is maintained. This is such a great way of viewing it because it links to our definition of communication that we did at the end of last week. So the process interior to the individual by which reality, and again, little r, evolves and is maintained. And so you can communicate outwardly with people in your life. That produces, maintains, transforms, and repairs reality. But the process interior to yourself also evolves and maintains reality with you, okay? An inner private communication process. The communicator is internally exchanging messages both as the sender and the receiver. Now, I know that in our last screencast I think we did anyway, we worked hard to make the conceptual shift from you just being a sender to being a source and sender. And so Honeycutt is just sort of simplifying it here by saying sender and receiver, but really you're both. You're source, sender, your receiver, and object. Okay? You internally exchange a message, and I think that makes sense. It takes different forms such as self-talk, inner speech, imagined interaction, daydreaming, listening, emotional awareness, just to name a few. These are all things, by the way, we are talking about in our semester. Self-talk, inner speech. In fact, we'll do these two this week in week 2. Imagined interaction, week 4. Daydreaming is going to be a part of week 4. Listening and emotional awareness, I think that's week 7 or 8, I'm not sure. So we're actually talking about all of these with intrapersonal communication this semester. And I'll hide myself. So human interpersonal communication serves both an expressive function, the revelation of meaning, and a generative function, the creation of meaning. So we've talked about being receptive and constructive of reality in regard to perception. Well, now, in regard to meaning, we are expressive and generative, if that makes sense. So these are really great ways of looking at it. I've got one more. So intrapersonal communication is considered as the foundation for all communication, a key source for understanding ourselves and our environments. I think this is a good way of looking at it, as the foundation for all communication. You have to have a thought, you have to have conceptual thought before you can actually vocalize something to an other. If you're talking about interpersonal communication, we're talking about meaning making in regard to that being where intrapersonal communication sort of resides. So that's why we are able to say this. This goes back to some of our discussions and some of our prior screencasts. Barker and Edwards are clearly scholars who think that, and who would think and agree that intrapersonal communication is important, it fits, and is something that we can study. Okay, so just wanted to make sure that they're biased in favor of what we're doing and saying what they're saying, which is fine. I think it's a good way of looking at it. So this allows us to look at intrapersonal communication, the act. Okay. So now we do intrapersonal communication, the study. All right. So here I'll bring myself back. So intrapersonal communication, the study of how we communicate with ourselves. And I like it as a study because it's something that we do, but really for us, this is what it is. We're studying it. We're learning about it. We're diving in. We're discussing it. We're trying to learn and change ourselves. We're trying to be more creative. We're trying to live a better, happier existence within ourselves and with others. And so the study of how we communicate with ourselves is the study of how our self-communication, self-talk and inner speech, impacts our self-concept and our self-esteem. See, we could just think about our thinking and how we talk to ourselves all day long, but really it's not going to be valuable if we don't make links to things within ourselves, like our self-concept, like our self-esteem, like our worldview, like our perception, okay? Like what we said in the prior slide with our emotional awareness and stuff like that. If we're not making links to those things, we're just thinking about the way that we talk to ourselves, and so we need to link it to something. So the study of how we communicate with ourselves, the study of how self-communication impacts our self-concept and self-esteem, the study of how our self-communication impacts our communication with others in our lives. And I think this is really important because it would be really easy for us to just focus on how I communicate with myself and how can I get better for my own good. But actually what it does is when you improve your internal process, when you start to understand really what's happening in here, then it impacts our communication with others in our lives. So I really like these definitions now that we've gone through everything that we've talked about. So what this does now is that we've seen it as the act, we've seen it as the study. Let's talk about some of the components. Okay, we have components of intrapersonal communication. So we have a definition. Let's break it down. I always find it's productive and useful to say let's see what it's actually made of. So it's made of self-talk. We've mentioned self-talk, and I said we're going to talk about self-talk. Here it is. Self-talk, a dialogue with the self, which may be external or internal. You might have an external intrapersonal communicative exchange using self-talk, where you are talking to yourself out loud, or where you burn yourself and gosh dang it, that was so hot. Why did you touch the burner? Like you just intrapersonally communicated. And you had a dialogue with yourself externally. You can have it internally too. Internally is the one that we usually think of, but it also happens externally. And then you have inner speech. Okay. Now I'm going to give you this definition of it, but we're not going to focus on it much. The inner speech is the process of coding thought into language, or decoding perceived language into meaning. okay? So you have the sensation, and then you immediately have to put, oh, that's a pear, oh, that's hot coffee. That is inner speech. The self-talk is the dialogue, okay? So for us in here, we're focusing on self-talk this semester, okay? And the reason why is because many conversations, many choices of speech, whenever we're talking with someone, decision-making, planning, or conflict are mentally processed before they are communicated outwardly, okay? And also, inner speech is something that is way more on the cognitive process side, not the conceptual thought side, which we talked about earlier. And remember, conceptual thought is more on the meaning-making part of it. That's really what we're going to talk about. The way that you put language to a thought, that's something that's way more intricate than I think we can cover in a semester. So we're focusing on self-talk, the dialogue with yourself that you have, okay? This is what you're focusing on the discussion board. This is what you're focusing on in your journal for the week. So just wanted to make that clear. Okay? So we have one more thing here. The dialogic nature of self-talk impacts our self-concept and self-esteem, like we said on the prior slide, in important ways. And so that is what we're doing. I've already mentioned your second your journal entry for this week. You do just have one journal entry this week, and the reason why I did that is because I'm asking you to reflect on your history of self-talk, and I'm asking you to identify experiences in your life that you think might have sort of formed the overall positivity and negativity of your self-talk. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the journals and the discussion boards. Okay? So I've only got about 4 minutes on this screencast left. I'm going to stop here and then start another one so I can finish all of these in one screencast. Okay? I'll see you in the next screencast.